Hi friends, it's Melissa Mortensen from polkadotchair.com, and today I'm excited to share with you a fun summer sewing project that I have organized with a few of my sewing and quilting friends. Me and 7 other designers have teamed up to create for you guys a fun free summer quilt pattern. The sign up for it is linked in the description below, or if you go to polkadotchair.com or my Instagram at polkadotchair, I have it linked there. By signing up, it will sign you up for the newsletters of myself and the 7 other designers. But guys, they are all my friends. I have known some of them for 15 years. They're great designers. I think you will love their newsletters. I wouldn't do it if it wasn't information I thought you guys would really enjoy. Plus, if you try it out and decide that the newsletters aren't for you, then every single one of them has an unsubscribe at the bottom. Super easy to unsubscribe. In my case, if you unsubscribe, your information's deleted. It's gone forever. My block is the Stripey Sails block. And I have already sent my block off to get turned into the finished quilt. So I don't have one anymore, but I want one for myself. So what I'm going to do today, I'm going to make a second block with you guys today so you can see how I made my block. And then there's a fun trick with my block. Some of the cuts will allow you to make a second block that's almost a mirror image of the first block. So you could put a few of these blocks together to make like a table runner, or like 9 of them together to make a baby quilt with some sashing. It's totally up to you how you want to do that, but I wanted to kind of give you the option so you don't feel like you're wasting those extra cuts of fabric. So once again, just to recap, you can find the link to sign up for the emails in my bio. If you are stumbling on this video sometime later, the sew along will run till the end of July. You'll be able to get all the block patterns to the end of July. If it is after July and you are finding this, I will change the link and put it in my shop. So I'll just have like a very nominal fee to charge you for the pattern for the sailboat, and you can purchase that and download it and sew along with us still. And I believe the other designers are going to do something like that. But today we're just working with the sailboat block, which I think is really fun and has lots of different kind of applications. So if you have followed me here before, you know what I like to do is usually I like to switch to an overhead camera and a camera on my sewing machine so you guys get a really good close-up view of what I'm sewing, and I will go ahead and start making this block with you. Okay friends, let's start making this block. Again, this is the Stripey Sails block. This is the example shown as part of the summer block party I mentioned, and I am going to make mine very scrappy. I thought it might be kind of fun to show you something totally different than the example, just for fun. So these are almost all of my Tulip Cottage collection fabrics. I had a lot of scraps left over from a quilt I made, so I thought I would create my sailboat block with that. I am after this going to turn this block into a quilted tote bag, and I'll share that on another video, but this video we're just going to cover piecing this block. So I've printed out the pattern. Again, the details to get the pattern are in the description section of this video. And what I have done, so for my background fabrics, instead of doing a white background like the example, I've chosen to do all of my background at a blue since I'm turning it into a tote bag. So I have several different kinds of blue fabrics here cut. I have the navy I'm going to use for the bow of the boat, this portion. And then I have a collection of pink and white fabrics. These are blue, those will go with the background for the sails. I'm going to follow the directions just step by step as noted in the pattern. As far as notions and tools that you'll need, you're going to need some sort of ruler. You can use your normal quilt ruler. I like for sometimes piecing things like this, I like to have a little bit smaller ruler to work with. You're going to need some sort of pen that you can mark on fabric with. I like the friction pens. You'll need a rotary cutter for trimming, and then you do have a half square triangle that you trim to 5.5 by 5.5, and I have a 5.5 inch block lock ruler that I will use for that, but if you don't have one, don't worry about it. Let's get going sewing this. So we're going to start by first creating this sail section. It is a half square triangle, but we need to piece the half square triangle first. So I'm going to set this aside. White always messes up the camera. It causes a lot of reflection. So I'm going to try and avoid pulling the instructions out as much as possible to kind of help you guys with that. All right, so I have all my pieces cut and I just need to take a second and sort out which ones I'm using for that smaller sail and put these aside. So for the smaller sail, we've got, I'm going to, let's see, I'm trying to decide which one. I think I'm going to do it like so. Sew it together that direction, because the last strip, when I cut my half square triangle, you're going to see a lot of this fabric. So I think I'm going to leave this portion with more of this big pink flower on it there versus swapping this. So all you need to do is sew these pieces together with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'll show sewing a couple of the seams together on my machine, but then after that I won't show all of the seams. All right, hopefully you can hear this okay. The sound on the camera by my machine is not as good, but what I have on my machine, I'm just gonna show you this once, is I have diagonal seam tape. This is by Allison of Quilt Click Sew. I have this red line lined up perfectly with my stitching line, and then the inside of this black line is a 1/4 inch for me. You need to take a moment if you're new to quilting, or maybe you've been quilting for a while but notice that your blocks don't always come out the right size, and make sure that you have a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance, which means just slightly under a 1/4 of an inch, and find some way to mark it on your machine, either with a special foot or some seam tape or a magnetic guide, whatever it is you need so that you know you've got a 1/4 inch that you're dealing with. All right, I don't always pin. That is just personal preference. I have my 2 pieces right on top of each other. Move these out of the way. If you have a hard time, sometimes if you notice when you start sewing, if your thread gets jammed, hold on to that thread as you start. Those are sewn. Now I just need to take it over to my iron and press. This piece is now ready to press. I am using a wool pressing mat. I have a quilter's cut and press underneath it just because the wool pressing mat does transfer some heat and I want to protect my table. I have my little Alicio iron that I love. Now you can press these seams to one side or you can press them open. When I sew stripes, I prefer to press my seams open. It's one of the only times that I do. I just think the stripes are straighter if you press the seams open. So this piece should hopefully be close to 6 by 6. If it's not, that's okay. We can kind of fudge it with the next steps. What you want to do next is you need to look at your pattern and you need to turn this to the wrong side and you need to mark a diagonal line, and you need to make sure that the diagonal line is going in the direction with the stripes as noted in the pattern. Otherwise your piece is not, the stripes on sail are going to go the wrong way. So I've got it like that, and I'm going to use my marking pen on the wrong side of the fabric and mark this diagonal line. All right, diagonal line is marked. Now I need to find my piece of background fabric, which like I said, I'm using the blue. And I need to place these 2 pieces on top of each other, right sides facing. I'm going to go to my machine and I'm going to sew 1/4 inch on each side of the drawn line. And that diagonal seam tape that I put on my machine will also help me know where the 1/4 inch mark is. And I have a 1/4 inch mark on my sewing machine to help too. Now that those two seams are sewn, hopefully you can see it's stitched on 1/4 inch on each side of that drawn line. I'm going to come in and using your rotary cutter and ruler and trim on the line you drew. So you're pretty much cutting the block in half. And you're going to end up with 2 triangles. And they're going to be totally different, so you can save the one we're not using and make a second block. And I'll chat a little bit about that at the end, the construction part at the end. But for now, we're going to use this block because this is the one that looks like the one on the pattern. Come to my machine, or my iron, excuse me. I'm just going to press this. Now, this needs to be 5.5 inch square, and it is not, so I like to use my rotating cutting mat. I really need to get a new one. This one's pretty old. And my block lock ruler. The block lock, I've shown them before on my channel, but it has a groove down the center that you use to lock onto that seam. So it helps not only make sure that you're cutting right on that diagonal to keep things square, but also keeps the ruler from slipping as you sew. And just trim this. Doesn't need to be trimmed too much. All right. I also like the rulers because they're good for scraping stuff out of the way. So now we have the sail, the smaller sail for the boat done. We're going to move on to the next part of the pattern, which is the large sail. So for the large sail, I'm using, I'm going to set this aside. I'm using white again, but a different print, and I'm going to do the same thing I did with the other sail and sew these together and press the seams open. So I'm going to go to that point and then we'll jump back in. That piece is sewn and pressed. Again, I pressed the seams open. Now you're going to again need to make sure you use the diagram, and this time instead of sewing, we're actually just going to cut. So you're going to, hopefully your ruler is longer than the diagonal, which mine is, you are just going to line up the corners of the ruler, or the edge of the ruler right on that corner, diagonal. It's not going to be square, it's not supposed to be, and just trim. All right, again, you can save this piece to make a second block with a little bit different stripe. We'll just set it aside. All right, so here we've got the one piece for the sail. Now we need to do the same thing to our piece of background fabric. And since this fabric isn't directional, just put one aside. And then these are going to get sewn together. There you can visualize what it will look like. I think it helps to lay it out so you know which way to sew it. And you're just going to put the two pieces on top of each other. Be careful not to manipulate this fabric too much because it is on the bias, so it might stretch a little bit. And do your best to kind of line this up. You're going to have a little bit of overhang on one of them. That's okay. And we're going to sew it with a 1/4" seam allowance down this diagonal line. You might want to, I don't usually use too many pins, but I'm going to put a couple pins in this just to keep it from shifting around as I move it over to my machine. Now that that is sewn, I've pressed it, and it needs to, at this point, be trimmed, and you're just going to have to use the measurements on your mat or your ruler. It needs to be trimmed to 6.5 by 9.5. So hopefully I can do this sitting down. I might need to stand up. Hopefully it won't block too much of the block. Block the block if I do that. So line that up. What I usually do is kind of try and get one side lined up, and then I'll go in and trim it if I need to. But that's pretty close to there. You need to come over 6.5 inches, which is this mark. Trim. Now I'm going to rotate it just to make sure that other side that I didn't mark is trimmed as well. That is trimmed. Now we have our 2 sails. You can kind of see how that's going to come together a little bit. We need to work on the bow next. So we're going to take our large rectangle of fabric we're using for the bow, and then we've got 2 squares that will be the outside corners. On those 2 pieces on the wrong side, you are just going to mark a diagonal line. Do it a little more neatly than mine. And then these get placed on this long piece of fabric with the seams going out, so it makes like a boat bow. And this time, instead of sewing a 1/4 inch on the side of the line, we're actually going to sew right on the drawn line. This fabric now needs to be trimmed off, but before I trim it, I like to press it first, just to make sure I don't have anything crazy going on. I just think having that extra little bit of fabric, and see, all that talk about sewing the right direction, and I sewed that one going the wrong way. So I will off camera remove that seam and switch that to going the other direction, but I'll show you on this side. So I've got this pressed, and what I do then is I check it on the back to make sure it's not coming over the edge. Maybe if I sewed something the wrong way, you'll see a little bit of the other fabric poking over, but that looks good. So then I just open it back up. And using my ruler and my rotary cutter, you can also just use scissors. If I'm doing a lot of these, I'll just use scissors and just trim that. And then we need to do the same thing to the other side, and we're ready to assemble the block. So I have my block ready to assemble. I'm going to lay it out just to show you how it goes together before I sew it, so that we can talk about how I mentioned that you can do the same block. You can use the extra leftover for another block, but the stripes kind of face a different direction. So we're just going to lay this out. It's not going to be perfect because I don't have seam allowances taken into account, but you'll get a gist. Okay, so this lays out like so. And it, like I said, it does fit once you get your seam allowances. So this, just to kind of give you a general idea, this is what the block will look like when it's sewn together with them going this direction. Move this down a little bit for the camera. Now, if you want to use those leftovers to make a second block, it's really simple. So we just swap these out. And like I said, the stripes will be different, but the gist of the block is still the same. Obviously, you would need to sew and trim these pieces together. And you end up able to make a second block using these leftover pieces as well, which is kind of fun. So you get kind of double duty out of the block. You'll need to cut additional, additional bow and then these 4 background fabric pieces in order to do that, but saves a lot of time and effort, in my opinion. All right, so let's go back to the original. All right, so all I'm going to do is I'm going to sew these 3 units together, these 2 units together. Then I'm going to sew each of those units to the center unit and then sew the bottom piece onto the block. All of those pieces are sewn together, and now I have my sailboat block ready to be turned into another project. You could, like I said, use the leftovers and make a second block, or make 4 blocks, create a fun table runner. It would be really cute. You can just keep going. 12 blocks would make a really cute quilt if you just put some simple sashing in them. I am going to turn this into like a summer tote bag. So if you are interested in that, then subscribe to the channel so you'll be notified when that video is up, which will be in the next couple of days. And if you enjoyed this video, please tell your friends, like, share, subscribe. It really helps me out, helps me know what kind of content you guys like, and word of mouth is always appreciated. Thank you guys so much.